Thank you everybody for attending this electric vehicles webinar this evening. My name is Diego Zun. I'm Council's Senior Sustainability Coordinator for Transport and Environment, and I'm leading the Electric Vehicle Innovation Program for Council. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers tonight that will draw on their personal and professional experiences to provide an overview of electric vehicle technology in Australia. Just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box, and our speakers will do their best to answer towards the end of the webinar. The questions that we cannot answer today will be addressed at a later date and will be sent to your registered emails. Also, please note that Council is not endorsing the specific businesses that may be associated with our presenters. And yes, this webinar is being recorded and will be circulated post-event. I would now like to welcome our Mr. Mayor, Councillor Laxalt, to provide an overview of the latest initiatives by Council regarding electric vehicle transition in our city.
Thanks, Diego, and hello everybody. My name is Jerome Laxalt. I'm Mayor of the City of Ryde, and welcome to this awesome webinar that our staff have put on today. Thank you to the amazing speakers who will no doubt give us a lot of information about electric vehicles. And it's really exciting that as a council, we're putting on this event because we've gone through quite the transformation over the last couple of years when it comes to things surrounding the environment, climate change, and electric vehicles. For the first time, we've also purchased some electric vehicles and we're trialing those out. And we know that we sought feedback on electric vehicle uptake across our city, and 3 out of 4 who responded said that they'd be looking to purchase electric vehicles to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to transition away from fossil fuels. It's something we've done as a council, and it's something that we're keen to encourage our community to do as well, to reduce our local emissions footprint as part of moving towards a cleaner and greener future. Obviously, one of the biggest barriers to electric vehicle uptake is the fear of the unknown, is access to infrastructure like as charging. And I'm pleased to announce that later this year, we'll commence a pilot rollout of electric charging stations in 3 town centres across the City of Ryde. So we're going along with this process too. We hope you can join us and that, the City of Ryde can be a leader in the uptake of electric vehicles and renewable technologies. Again, thank you to our amazing staff who have driven this transition as well, no pun intended, obviously. And I'll hand it over to our host and our amazing speakers. Thanks and thank you to everyone who's joined today, and hopefully you can have some of your questions answered and take up that that next car you buy can be an electric one. Cheers.
All right, can I throw to Bryce to kick us off?
Yes, thank you. I'll quickly do my share screen. So if you'll all bear with me for a moment whilst I get the technology working. Yes, have I shared? Here we go. And I should be able to get a view and a full screen mode. How does that look for everyone? Beautiful. Okay, my name's Bryce Gate and I actually come from the Australian Electric Vehicle Association, and I'll try and keep myself to a good 15 minutes. So I'm just writing down the time that I started just to be sure. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through the what, why, when guide to EV choice in Australia. So basically, to start with, a bit of EV terminology, because I have a bad habit of using a whole lot of terms that people may or may not know. I also will go through what's available in Australia and the world. I'll go through why it benefits both you and the environment to buy an EV. And then I'll go through when might be the time to move to an EV in your household. So first up, I'll be running an exam at the end, by the way, people. This is the EV terminology that gets thrown around a lot of the place these days, so it's best that I cover it to begin with. Plug-in electric vehicles are those that plug into some sort of power outlet, and whoops, I'm getting a bit of feedback. Plug into a outlet. So you've got your battery electric vehicle, your BEV. You've got your PHEV, plug-in hybrid vehicle, which has both plug and oil, petrol, or diesel, which will run it. Then you come to the hybrid electric vehicle, which is the original Priuses and those types of things, which are electric motor saving power to the battery on braking and then reusing that power to save petrol into the future. So you can save between about 5 and 15% of the petrol that you're using. I tend not to call them electric vehicles anymore because if you run out of petrol, they stop because they're based on petrol, not on electricity. And the fourth electric car that's often talked about is the hydrogen car or the fuel cell electric car. They do run on hydrogen, but they use hydrogen in a chemical reaction to create electricity and then run the electric motor that way. They need a battery, they need an electric motor to run because the hydrogen basically will run at a very constant pace. It doesn't take acceleration very well and it can't regenerate hydrogen. You can only redo it by filling at a fuel station type setup. Anyway, they're the basic types. I'll be sticking to the battery electric vehicles today. Another common term that's used by people is an EVSE. Commonly or somewhat erroneously in some cases called a car charger, but that's what we'll call them today. You can have your AC types, which is the type that's used with your power points or general electrical supplies in households. They're the three on your left, and on the right are the big DC type ones that you use on the highways. For instance, those ones I've managed to do Melbourne to Canberra to Sydney and then up to Coffs Harbour. And then because of the bushfires last year, I came back from Coffs Harbour via Tamworth and Dubbo in 2 days. And I just used the NRMA network of those big ones on your right there. And I could easily do the trip in 2 days. So I sort of very successfully proved on that trip that you don't get slowed down anymore by any electric car over a petrol anymore. Okay, moving to the next slide. I also try to remind people that electric vehicles are not just cars, and we have everything from trucks, bicycles, motorbikes. It's a whole EV revolution. All transport is moving to electricity vehicles and getting rid of the fossil fuels. Everything in that picture, by the way, except for one that's at the bottom left, bottom right, is available either for order or for sale now. The one at the bottom right exists, so everything there exists, but it is a low-speed test vehicle built here in Croydon in Melbourne, Australia. So yeah, don't forget it's not just cars, but that's what my talk today will be about. What's available in the world? Well, bucket loads would be the short answer, and there's lots more coming. There's many dozens, in fact, working out to I think about 100 and something electric vehicles, both plug-in and full battery, available around the world, and many, many more coming. Some of these here you'll see looks like the VW Combi. That's called the ID Buzz. That should be 2023. The one at the top with the sort of the red stripy effect on the blue is the VW ID3, which are literally rolling off the production line at the moment, and that will be hitting European showrooms in very large numbers very soon. You can actually start ordering, and I think they're just starting to deliver them now. And then unfortunately, we won't be seeing that one in Australia, by the way. That will be getting what's called the ID4, which is that red swoopy one roughly in the lower centre. Anyway, lots available, lots more coming. Australia, not quite so much. It's looking better than it was in a year or so, but we have, I've actually just realised as of yesterday, I've got to delete the Renault Zoe. That will no longer be for sale. So we were up to 9, we're now back to 10. We were up to 11, we're now back to 10 again for sale. The Renault Zoe, Renault being a smaller car manufacturer in Australia, or supplier in Australia, as opposed they are the biggest light vehicle manufacturer in the world, the Renault Alliance, but they just couldn't find it easy selling a small market car for them versus Hyundai and Nissan can sell theirs in much larger numbers because they have a much bigger presence in Australia. So sadly, what was quite a nice EV has now been pulled. But anyway, they're the sort of numbers. I won't go through them in detail. There are a small number coming out of a selection of the overseas ones I showed. MGZS should be here quite soon, later this year. You can actually start ordering them now. They were from $47,000 on the road for the first 100 batch if you order it. The ones I have question marks on are relatively hopeful to be here next year. With this year. A Tesla Model Y, I put that as a dark horse because it's ahead of schedule on production. So I'm hoping that may actually make it this year rather than next year, which I'll talk about because they're comfortably ahead. And I've actually just shipped a couple to New Zealand for testing. So and by the way, there's actually, if you look at the EV automotive one here, the EC11 van, that's a 1 3/4 ton van with a really good range, and that's being brought in by a private importer, and that should be available in Q4 this year. Just under $100,000, but a very good range, a very good vehicle. You can buy second-hand ones here in Australia, so you do have some options there. I won't go through those in detail. But there's a number of options, and these were all delivered to Australia by the manufacturers. As you may have heard, there's a number of people bringing in what are called grey imports, and that's the next slide. You can actually buy some of these vehicles that are brought in, mainly from Japan. They've been brought in, and they're second-hand vehicles due to the Japanese requirements for cars to be more and more stringently roadworthy as they get older, try and force people to update and buy new cars to keep the market going. We get the option of quite low mileage, quite good cars coming here. There's a couple of schemes being set up for importing them in numbers and providing some sort of warranty and technical support, but there has been a number brought in by private importers, and there is issues there that they have no warranty and that no dealers for, because the dealers don't want to touch grey imports generally. The schemes are being set up like for Good Car. It's up in New South Wales and Tasmania, and will be in Victoria again once the COVID restrictions down here have been lifted again. But they are setting up warranty and dealer networks. So worth a check out. There's some of the longer range Leafs, later model Leafs. You can buy the EMV van. The Mia Mini, basically the Mia Minicab is based on the iMev. It's the similar mechanicals. For those of you who are feeling really daring, you could pick up one of the converted Blade Electron. I know Getz's to about 10 years old now, but they're not. They're an interesting vehicle. I've got a reputation for fixing them, although I think I've got post-traumatic stress disorder from doing them, because just about every one of them was a different vehicle to the previous. They're all effectively prototypes. There's about 50 of them around. You can pick them up quite cheap if you're a hands-on sort of person. But I wouldn't go there if you just want a car to drive day to day. Anyway, we're going to look at why an EV benefits you and the environment. First of all, for the environment, you get no tailpipe pollution. So in inner city areas or just city corners, schoolyard, parking areas, you don't have that tailpipe pollution. The overall emissions, which I'll talk about next, are reduced overall, and negligible emissions of using solar or wind power. You get reduction in waste coolants, oil, brake pads, plugs, all that sort of stuff. Yes, there are some issues sourcing the minerals for them, but that applies to a lot of minerals. Digging holes in the ground in third world countries can cause problems with labour market practices, and basically the whole mining industry needs to clean itself up there. So I don't think EVs are the single cause of the problem. Anyway, moving right along. For you, definitely your service costs are reduced, and I'll talk about that at the moment. Electricity is definitely cheaper than petrol. And if you're using the right tariffs and charging overnights, you can be very cheap. And if you're using your own solar, effectively free. Okay, a lot of people ask you this question, so I'll just quickly bring it up. If you're driving a new, or 2017 in this case, Corolla for 10,000 kilometers in a year, you'll put out roughly 2 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year for that driving. If you're driving around in Tasmania buying an equivalent size car, which is the BMW i3, you're putting out 1/4 of a ton because of the hydroelectricity component there. And even in Victoria, with our horrible brown coal, for the city cycle, you're still putting out less carbon dioxide. So even running on grid power now, you're producing less emissions than you would be from an equivalent new petrol car. And the other side of the coin is, as the grid cleans up, that gets better and better. If we're moving towards South Australia with 50% mix, or Tasmania with a very high proportion of hydro, we're getting rid of that carbon emission very nicely. By the way, if anybody's interested in the detail of these slides, because I am moving quite quickly, you can email me. I'll put the email address up at the end of this session. I will do this very briefly. If you're looking at a Renault Zoe, which is a quite efficient little small car to buzz around town, or around sort of the outer Melbourne or outer city regions, you'll be spending $330 extra on your electricity bill, but you're not spending $1,200 in petrol for that roughly 10,000 Ks. So you're saving over nearly $900 in petrol to start with, fuel costs. You're saving a significant amount in petrol. So for every 10,000 Ks roughly, you're saving $1,100, $1,200. That's the sort of numbers that you're looking at. Okay, again, I'm not going to go through the detail tonight. These all actually come from an article that's written and circled down the bottom on the driven, but there's a whole set of criteria when you might want to consider. So if you're looking for something that does 50 kilometers or more per day, pretty much every EV available now will do it. If you're doing 400 more kilometers or more a day, then you're looking at the Teslas, the Hyundai Kona, and that's about it at the moment. So, and everything fits in between. If you're looking for a car for towing, pretty much at the moment, the Model 3 Tesla, the Kangoo ZE, Jaguar I-Pace and the Model X will do it. And that's about it at the moment. I can talk more to that one another day. If you're looking for something around 60,000 or under, there's not a lot of choice. The Ioniq and the Nissan Leaf and a few demonstrator Konas will get you in for a new car there, or for that matter, the Kangoo. If you're looking at a used one, which I mentioned, there's a number of vehicles that if you're beetling around a town or country short region area, then pretty much they'll all do it too, and you're getting something under $30,000 or even $20,000 for the Ioniqs and Leafs. If you're looking at the practicalities of an EV, then you're getting to, you need to think about your switchboard and street cable. As you see there, if that's an old switchboard, you may actually have to upgrade, but it's not the electric car's fault that you're upgrading it. It's just sort of triggered the need to do it. I've written a number of articles on these things. Renew magazine, put out by the Renew organisation, edition 143 there, or our Australian Electric Vehicle Association newsletter, EV News, also has that. If you have somewhere else to charge the street, like I have with my previous car, the Nissan Leaf, that's quite handy. So if you haven't, not a deal breaker, but you then need to start sourcing maybe some fast chargers around the place, or the local service, not the local shopping centre may in fact have a free EV charging point there. You need to work out your electricity tariffs, because they can make quite more or less expensive. If you're charging at the high peak rate during the day, you might be paying 4 times as much as you would overnight. And for an electric car, unlike an air conditioner, you can choose when to charge it, whereas an air conditioner, you need to run it at a particular time and no other. And you may need to buy some extra adapters and things, but that's a few extra dollars. So that's the practicalities. There's also when to consider you don't have an option anymore. And there's a number of countries, and more are jumping on this bandwagon, where they're actually setting dates for the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles. And some of them with large automotive manufacturing capacity are starting to set those dates. So things like France, UK has set 2040, 2035, and the UK are about to announce that they're going to move that to 2032. So yeah, eventually we'll not be able to buy them anymore. If you want to find out more about electric vehicles, we have a website with a whole series of fact sheets available, and that's the ava.asn.au site. And if you'd like to join and help us in promoting EVs and helping EV owners get the best out of their cars, it's not a very expensive membership. For an individual, it's $50. Concession rate is $25, and for a corporate member, that's only $125 a year. And you get a quarterly newsletter, which is about 64 pages, magazine size and quality, and a whole lot of access to data and information, as well as helping us put government submissions together and the like. Also, we're having what's called the 2020 EV Vision e-conference. It's now in our 3rd iteration due to all the COVID restrictions. It was going to be a big in-person conference in Melbourne. It's now then moved to an online format. And then with the current restrictions, we couldn't actually get businesses to actually commit to running the conference side of it. So we've actually had to flow it out a little bit to 27, but that is definitely our set. Follow the AVA website to see what the list of speakers and things. The formal program will be listed later this month. As I say there, the future is clear. EVs are here. 2020 vision. If you've got any burning questions at the end of all three, please make them at the end of all three talks. Coming up next is Brent Clark, and I'll quickly swap over my share, so I'll stop sharing. I'll give you a quick intro on Brent as he's finally getting himself organised. Brent is the CEO and founder of energy consultancy work Wattblock, and Wattblock has assisted apartment buildings housing over 60,000 residents with solar feasibility, energy efficiency and electric vehicle charging reports. Wattblock's projects include working for Advanced Queensland, New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, and North Sydney, Mosman and Wallara councils. Brent specialises in breaking down the barriers of solar and specialises in EV charging for strata and apartment buildings. Welcome, Brent.
Thanks so much, Bryce. Great to be here. And it's fantastic to see Ryde Council getting right behind the EV revolution with this webinar today. So for the next 10 minutes, we're going to be looking at apartment blocks. And if you are an apartment dweller in the city of Ryde, then you shouldn't feel like it's too hard for you to join the electric vehicle charging revolution. So we'll jump straight in. And we're going to have a look at an apartment block that's located at 133 Bowden Street in Meadowbank. And we consider this to be a green apartment block, a future-proofed apartment block, and a template for what all the apartment blocks in Sydney should be aspiring to be. So this is a complex of just 58 units. And you can see here a photo of a 30 kilowatt solar system on the roof of the apartment building. Interestingly, if you look down the rest of the street, no solar panels on those other apartment blocks. Something we'll hopefully try and fix in the future. Now, the 30 kilowatt solar system on the Genesis building is feeding a microgrid, a smart meter network that connects all the apartments and the common area meter in the building, which means the solar power is actually helping to run fridges in each of the 58 units during the day. And down the bottom, you can see there's an electric vehicle charging station in the basement car park. So this is actually has been approved by the strata committee in this building. And the thing that we're really excited about is if an electric vehicle were to connect to that electric vehicle charge station during sunlight hours, they would actually be getting solar powered EV charging inside an apartment block right here in the city of Ryde. So this building developed by Sasco, and they've had such a good response from this. There's a second building they're doing opposite Top Ryde shopping centre at 176 Blaxland Road, and they're going to do exactly the same thing again. So hopefully this is a model of how apartment blocks will be moving into the solar-powered electric vehicle charging future. And as far as we know, this is the first of its kind in Sydney, this one that we're looking at right here. So I'll just move on to the next slide. We've previously done an EV and Strata report in consultation with Tesla, AGL, Evercharge, and the City of Sydney. And the scope of the project, we interviewed over 700 residents living in 80 different strata schemes. And we did deep dives on 20 of those apartment blocks just to see what could be done to get them road mapping their apartment buildings for electric vehicle charging. And here are some of the participating strata buildings that we worked with. As you can see, electric vehicles are coming into the premium buildings first, and then they're going to slowly come down into the medium apartment blocks, and finally we'll be retrofitting our 60s and 70s three-storey walk-ups. So some key findings: 79% of people living in the apartment buildings wanted a user-pay system for electric vehicle charging, and 78% of people were in favour of installing charge systems right now. Most importantly, people want the charge station to be in their own individual lot car spaces, with 61% of people wanting that. Unfortunately, only 11% of people knew the location of the nearest public charging station. And we've just heard from the Mayor of the City of Ryde that 3 public charging stations are going to be scoped out over the coming year in the City of Ryde area. And as the awareness of where fast charging is located and potentially some slower charging inside your apartment building permeates through the community, more people will be buying these electric vehicles. So just if you're in an apartment block, a couple of challenges. You've got to make sure you've got enough capacity on your switchboard. You may have to put new cable trays through your basement car park to get that faster charging speed to the individual car spots. We'll come back and we'll talk about visitor parking, a bit of a contentious issue inside our strata schemes. But now is the time to get your bylaws in place. New bylaws perhaps for charging in both the individual car spots and the visitor car spots inside your apartment building. So, as I mentioned, in our apartment blocks, there's not typically a lot of extra car parking space. Strata schemes are trying to make sure not too many people park in there for too long, particularly residents inside the building. So maybe this is not the best place to be putting a communal car charger. Maybe we should be working on those solutions to get the charging into the individual car spots. This is what's happening today. This is a real life photo, a couple of challenges here. That basement car park is actually flooded in the past. It's a trip hazard. Cars are driving over that power cable. So this is absolutely not the ideal way to charge an electric vehicle in a strata basement car park. And a few apartment buildings have meter boards that look like this. And you know, electric vehicles are a perfect opportunity to get a refresh of your electrical infrastructure in the building and prepare for that new energy future. Also think about car share spots in strata. It could be possible to do a shared electric vehicle in a car share spot that might be available to people outside the building, or if you've got a block of 100 or so apartments, there's now companies that will provide you with a dedicated Tesla Model 3 that can be a car share that can be put into one spot in the basement car park, opened with a mobile phone app and only used by people inside that apartment building. So I'll now hand over for the next section to Evan Darmanin. He's the director and principal consultant of ChargedUp, an independent consultancy in solar PV, battery storage and EV charging. He's an EV driver himself, committed to clean energy, and is providing consulting and training to local and state government agencies across New South Wales. He also teaches foundations in renewable energy and sustainability at the New South Wales TAFE. So over to you, Evan.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you for that presentation. Okay, so I believe I'm sharing my screen. Brent, just because I know you're still available, can you see my screen?
I can now see your screen, Evan. Take
Excellent.
it away.
Thank you very much. Okay. Right. So a bit about ChargedUp. We do a lot of our business in car parks. I'm not the most fun to take on holidays. You can ask my wife whenever we go on holidays. Here was our trip to Cairns, and we went sightseeing, as you can see, to the end of the fast charge network that has appeared in Queensland. My consultancy is an independent focusing on what charging technology is available, what electric vehicles are coming to Australia. I've personally been driving electric vehicles for 5 years now, and I help councils and small businesses to look at how they can introduce EV charging infrastructure into their sites, as well as looking at EV vehicles for their fleets. So that's about me. I've travelled all across New South Wales, and ChargedUp have pretty much wherever we go, we have a look at what the charging infrastructure is in the towns and cities that we visit. And obviously in Europe, where there's a few more electric vehicles than there are in Australia, we're starting to see what the future is going to be like for Australia playing out in other markets around the world. So that's a very good insight as to what's coming, because we just need to look over at the more mature markets to see how they're doing it and take the best ideas and makes the transition for Australia a little bit straightforward, because we can see how other countries are doing it. So what I'll be talking about is the projections that I've been seeing in terms of future EV growth that are happening around the world and in Australia. I'll be talking about the benefits of an EV as well as the barriers to EV adoption here in Australia. I'll be talking about charging technology as well as the link with solar and renewable charging, and also a bit about my own personal experience, because you may be sitting there thinking, should I buy an EV? What are the pitfalls and the benefits? How do I charge? Those sort of questions, and I'll put my own personal spin on it before we get to a Q&A, because I know Brent and Bryce have had their own point of view as drivers for many years. So I'm going to start off with referring to Bloomberg New Energy Finance's 2020 electric vehicle outlook. And basically they're saying that in the next 5 years, EVs will hit 10% of global sales, rising to 28% in 2030 and 58% by 2040. Now, if we refer to this chart on the left here, which is ending in 2023, we can see that China is really driving sales much higher, and there are other laggards such as in India and in sub-Saharan Africa that are a little bit more of a laggard. But what we're seeing is that there is quite a difference in where you look around the world as to what the uptake is. So whilst we might say, okay, it's only 28% by 2030, if we look at 2030, we're going to see more than 50% of all vehicles in China will be electric within 10 years, new sales that is. And other countries such as Europe are not far behind. So within 10 years, basically the majority of sales in those more mature markets will be all electric. And whilst others will be laggards, basically we're saying within 20 years, more than half of all of global sales will have gone electric. But it's very interesting to note that China is really leading the way, and they have a big sway when it comes to this disruption. Now, the main driver of EV adoption, whilst sustainability and action on climate change is of course an important motivator to switching to a low emissions transport, really what's driving this disruption is dollars. The price parity between an internal combustion vehicle that you may be driving today and an electric vehicle, that is the price that you will actually pay to drive it off the lot, is expected to intersect with internal combustion engines by the mid-2020s. So within 5 years, we would expect in Australia that, say, for $30,000, you can buy an electric or a petrol, whatever you like. They should be about the same price. Now, large cars in Europe, where fuel excise and other taxes and incentives mean that within 2 years, we may see the capital cost of electric vehicles and internal combustion engines reach price parity within 2 years in Europe. Whilst some of the smaller vehicles in India and Japan, which are very cheap to make internal combustion engines today, it may be 10 years before price parity occurs. So we're talking about the capital cost of buying the cars somewhere within the next 10 years is going to reach parity, starting with the large cars and then moving to the small cars. But EV ownership isn't just about the upfront cost. The total cost of ownership of a vehicle, especially if you drive it a lot, may already be at price parity today. So for example, if you buy a $50,000 electric car, such as a Nissan Leaf or a Hyundai Ioniq, such as the City of Ryde have purchased, you'll find that you break even around about 126,000 kilometers. So if you're planning on driving 126,000 kilometers in a year, then you'll basically break even on buying an electric vehicle over a cheaper petrol car by the time you hit that sort of mileage. So if you do a lot of Ks, say 20,000 kilometers a year, within 6 years you'll have made your money back. So we're almost at price parity already. Electric vehicles that are a bit larger, such as the Kona or larger SUVs, they are more expensive, so you have to drive them more in order to recover the fuel costs. So about 150,000 kilometers, and big utes that are much more expensive, such as the Tesla Cybertruck and the Rivian R1T, that are more than $100,000. You have to drive them a lot to save enough fuel to break even. But as we see the capital cost of those vehicles come down, we're going to start seeing that break even mileage come even closer. And whilst you might be looking at these numbers saying, well, I'm not going to do that many Ks, what you have to consider is that some people are. So if you think about things like transport as a service, providers such as GoGet or potentially Car Next Door or other new business models that may come up. Brent just talked about a ride share within a strata building. They may be doing high Ks. So taxis, for example, or other ride sharing services may be doing 250,000 kilometers within a couple of years. So electric vehicles are already making sense for them. And the day that autonomous vehicles are permitted, where these cars are basically driving themselves without needing to sleep, and they're driving continually, rest assured, a $200,000 electric vehicle that can drive itself is cheaper than a $50,000 petrol car. simply because of the total cost of ownership. So whilst we might be saying that adoption is 10 to 20 years away, if things like autonomous vehicles are sooner than that, then basically the EV becomes cheaper to afford straight away. Now, as Bryce mentioned, the transition may happen well before 2040 because, for example, in Norway, you will not be able to buy a petrol car in 2025 in Norway. And even in India and Israel and Ireland and these other countries here, they're basically saying we're going to ban the sale of petrol cars by these sort of dates. So whilst the Bloomberg outlook just looks at the economics, the government may enforce transition even earlier. It's interesting to note that the UK have targets around 2032. They're a large right-hand drive market. So what will that mean for Australia if the UK and the right-hand drive vehicles, you can't buy them anymore? Maybe manufacturers will only make electric vehicles. It's an interesting thought to think, when will Australia ban the sale of the internal combustion engine? It's pretty hard to imagine that it'll be in our lifetime, but you know, quite potentially the economics could drive this to make this happen anyway, or we simply won't be able to buy them because nowhere else in the world will they be available. We have approximately 12 million electric vehicles sold globally in 2019, and that's driven mainly by China. So China did 3.3 million electric vehicles last year alone. The United States and Europe were second and third, and all others made up a fairly small proportion. Just in Australia, we have 6,718 electric vehicles sold last year, which is a 150% year-on-year increase. That was mainly driven by sales of the Tesla Model 3 and to some extent the Hyundai range of vehicles. The total amount of electric vehicles in Australia is now around about 15,000. So we're getting there, but in comparison to what's happening in China with 3.3 million, we're fairly small in the grand scheme of things, and we'll really be driven by what's happening around the world. To put it in perspective of what China is doing, Shenzhen, for example, they have a population of, I believe, over 20 million. They have more than 20,000 electric taxis on their roads, and that represents 99% of this particular taxi fleet. And these vehicles are all electric. So you can imagine the scale of production that's happening in China to be able to have this many electric vehicles. And that's what we're seeing. This scale of production is driving down the costs and making electric vehicles more affordable to manufacture at scale. Also, what's interesting to note is that Shenzhen have a 100% electric bus fleet, which they completed in 2017. Here they all are, about 13,000 buses run this city, and they're all electric. And each one of these buses has enough batteries to run a small building. So the amount of batteries that are being made in China is what's really driving this transition and getting that cost of, say, a $50,000 car down to a $30,000 car over the next few years, simply at this sort of scale of production. You don't have to go to China to jump on an electric bus. If you happen to be in London, whenever you're allowed to travel again, London have more than 60 electric buses. Or if you've flown or been to the domestic airport in the last couple of years out of Sydney or Brisbane, they have fleets of electric buses that transport people from the Blue Emu car parks into the terminals there. And ACT also have a couple of vehicles on trial. New South Wales government has announced the plan to look at 8,000 electric buses over the next couple of years and basically transform the entire metropolitan fleet over to electric. And going back to what I was talking about, where if you're doing lots of Ks, it makes sense to go to EV now just on dollars alone. This is why we're seeing buses in China, other countries around the world, and also in Australia here, transferring to electric vehicles. Also, what's happening, other than the bus fleet initiatives, but the New South Wales government this year have announced their Future Transport 2056 plan, which includes electric and hybrid vehicles. And I've included the link here in the presentation materials when they're distributed, but I'm sure you can find this if you have a bit of a Google. But there are two key elements within the New South Wales electric and hybrid vehicle plan. The first is a set 10% target for the New South Wales government to purchase their passenger fleet within the next 12 months. So a 10% target for electric and hybrid vehicles. And as Bryce mentioned in his presentation, the fact that government is now going to be purchasing these vehicles and turning them over in the next couple of years, it may mean that new vehicles for government that are $50,000 enter the second-hand market at much more affordable prices. So if you're thinking that a $50,000 electric vehicle is a bit too dear for you today, keep an eye out for the second-hand market in the next couple of years, which is one of the key tenets of this New South Wales plan. The other interesting thing that's being done by the New South Wales government is looking at regional fast charging to unlock the regions all the way from border to border and from coast to South Australia, and looking at how can we make fast charging more accessible all around New South Wales. Now, as it happens, I've got here an overlay of where you can currently fast charge here in New South Wales. So it's interesting to note that the networks that are looking to be supplemented by or supported by the New South Wales government is in complement to a network that already exists. So you may not be aware, but you can actually drive pretty much anywhere east of Dubbo and up and down the coast without any hassle. You can find a fast charger somewhere on that network, but the New South Wales government is looking to enhance that as well. The benefits of electric vehicles are numerous. One of the most striking things is never buying petrol again is quite a nice thing to do. The cost savings are absolutely clear, and I'm going to talk about that in just a little while. You'd be surprised about how much nicer it is to drive an electric car because it's quiet. It tends to handle better and perform better. Interesting to note that electric vehicles, whilst being quieter, also mean that electric trucks are able to deliver after curfew. So when the COVID really hit and Woolworths and Coles were doing their deliveries 24/7, Woolworths were able to use their electric trucks and deliver after curfew, and now continue to deliver after curfew because they're able to without those noisy trucks. The other clear benefit we can see with electric vehicles is lower emissions. So let's talk about that. If you refer to the Australian government's fuel guidelines, the published emissions forecast, basically the fuel that you use to drive your car emits 2.36 kilograms of CO2 per litre, whereas electricity from the grid is only 820 grams per kilowatt hour. Now, there's about a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of kilowatt hours to litres, but basically if you have a car that uses 10 litres per 100 Ks, it's equivalent to an electric car that uses 20 kilowatt hours. If you have a car that's more efficient, you'd expect an EV equivalent to be less. But basically, just from charging from the grid today, it's 31% better for the environment to use electricity in Australia than it is to use fuel. So that's better straight away. If you live in Tasmania where the grid is greener, or in the future in New South Wales as the grid gets greener, we're going to see that improve as well. Or you could look at how you can use solar power to charge your electric car. So this is 6 solar panels, and I wanted to put this in perspective because 6 solar panels isn't really that big. That's enough to generate enough energy to drive your car for a year. The equivalent number of petrol barrels is around about 9.5. So you'd have to stack barrels 3 wide and twice as tall as the average person in order to drive a car, about 1,500 litres in a year. So you can see side by side that there's a lot more fuel required than the amount of power that's generated by a solar panel. But the thing is that solar keeps generating year on year, but you don't renew oil, you just have to buy more of it. So this is what it looks like after 5 years, and this is what it looks like after 10 years. 6 solar panels can drive you for 10 years, whereas you need to buy something like 100 barrels of oil in order to drive your car for that long. So driving using solar is a great way to improve your sustainability, and this really makes it clear. If you want to drive net zero, putting solar panels on your roof, if you can, of around about 1.5 to 2 kilowatts is usually enough to offset the average user for a year. Alternatively, if you're like me and you can't put solar panels on your roof, you can buy green power for something like $150 a year. Should be enough to completely offset all of your emissions associated with generating electricity that you get from the grid, and effectively then your zero emissions. If you want to drive directly from solar without doing some kind of an offset, what you would look at is something like a 5 kilowatt solar system, where you have enough available energy during the day to directly charge your car in a reasonable time frame. So if you have a rooftop solar system, chances are you can charge your electric vehicle completely from renewable energy. Key barriers to electric vehicle adoption is the affordability of vehicles, concerns around range anxiety, and just general awareness. As I mentioned earlier, affordability is capital cost that may cross over within the next 10 years, but affordability in the terms of the total cost of ownership is something that really needs to be looked at when considering electric vehicle. Typically, you save around about $1,000 to $4,000 a year, depending on how you drive the vehicle. Now let's talk about range anxiety. The two most common questions I get is, where can I charge and how long will it take? Well, here is a picture of Ride Council. Turns out there is already public charging available in Ride Council already. So Top Ride have chargers, the Macquarie Centre has chargers, Chatswood, which is outside the LGA, but they also have chargers as well. So there is already a network of public chargers, and as the Mayor has introduced earlier, there is more public charging coming into Ride Council. But the fact is that 70% of users actually charge at home almost all of the time, and that's been my experience. What home charging looks like is simply, if you have a power point, you can charge an electric vehicle. You don't have to go to public charger to charge. If you have a power point, you're ready to charge. Or you can install a dedicated fast charger like the photograph I have here. Sorry, excuse me, not a dedicated fast charger, just a dedicated home charger. Now, a regular power point delivers about 180 kilometers of charging overnight, which is 4 times the daily needs of most drivers. There's no additional cost if you've already got a power point in your garage, although it is less convenient and can be a little bit of a safety consideration if you've got old wiring. Whereas a dedicated charger will introduce about daily needs of the vehicle in about 1 hour, and overnight will charge from flat to full. It costs about $1,000 to $2,000 to install a charger, depending on what infrastructure you have, but usually a dedicated circuit, such as what you would install if you're installing an oven, you would install like that. So if you were going to put in an oven, it's basically the same process to put in an electric vehicle charger. That amount of capacity, about a 32 amp dedicated circuit. I find a dedicated charger much more convenient, similar to a fuel bowser, you just plug in and go. Now, if you're interested in charging directly from solar, there are 2 products on the market. One is the Solar Edge inverter, the other is the Zappi charger. Both of these are able to directly put solar power into your car and only ensure that the amount of available solar is what is used to charge the vehicle, something you can look into as well. Now, if you're interested in public charging using fast chargers, such as this petrol station model here offered by ChargeFox, all of these public charging, ChargeFox, EV Networks, and NRMA provide electricity as fast charging, but it is from 100% green power. So if you charge from these networks, which is all the available public networks of fast charging available in Australia today, it is 100% emissions free. So effectively, it's renewable because they're offsetting their energy using green power. I'm just going to sum up by saying that the lessons that I've learned from overseas is that the mature markets offer all kinds of charging. Now, anywhere from a power point to a dedicated fast charger, we see different offerings around the world. And by offering different models of charging everywhere, it basically means the answer to where can I charge is everywhere, and that means mass adoption. So here is the city of Oslo in Norway. This is all of the fast chargers available in the city. And whilst that may look like pretty good coverage, wait until you see what it looks like in terms of level 2, the kind of charging that council might put in. That's the public charging available at kind of that dedicated. Whereas level 1, the sort of power points that you might have in your regular garage, this is all the public power points that are available that kind of just trickle charge. So by offering all 3 different types of charging, basically it means that where can I charge is everywhere. Now, this is what it looks like in terms of public charging in Sydney and in Australia already. So you might be surprised to see that there is actually a lot of charging available, and initiatives such as offered by the New South Wales government and councils means that this is only going to increase. My own experience of driving electric vehicle is that anywhere in Sydney is faster and easier than petrol. Pretty much anywhere I can get home to charge is easy, and I don't have to go to a petrol station even for 5 minutes. anywhere on the highway to Dubbo, Brisbane or Melbourne is no stress. Don't even have to really think about it. I just might want to plan my toilet stops along fast charging stops. And I have been into country New South Wales, and whilst it used to be really hard, it's now actually quite easy because of the NRMA network and the forthcoming other networks from ChargeFox and EV networks, as well as the New South Wales government. This is the targets that New South Wales government are looking to go after as well. So my own personal experience is I've calculated about $3,500 a year is how much I save driving an electric vehicle. It's definitely quieter, it's definitely safer, and it's definitely more fun. I drive with green power, so no emissions, and it's certainly nice to be able to contribute to healthier air. So in summary, what we've seen from the survey from council is that there has been a positive response from people within Ryde Council to support electric vehicles, and council has responded by buying their own. So this is the Ioniq that council have, and council's supporting this disruption as well as generally in sustainability, and the New South Wales government is also supporting it. So there's a lot of momentum now happening in Australia as councils and governments are looking to support it, and more people are buying electric vehicles. So I've seen a lot of questions have kind of come up in the chat while I've been talking, and I've gone a few minutes longer because I guess I wanted to answer a couple of the questions in a bit more detail. But what I'd like to do now is maybe throw over to Diego to facilitate the Q&A, and we'll get into the panel discussion for the next 10 minutes until the end of the presentation. Diego, have we got you?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see me?
Yes, can see you. Bryce and Brent, I can see you're on the line as well.
Yep. Checking in.
Excellent.
Oh,
Hang on, I just need to make sure I stop sharing. Okay, so we should be back into the main meeting. All right, what questions have we come in on the chat?
We've got quite a few questions. It's just a little bit tricky at the moment because I'm using my phone. What I could see is most of the questions have been addressed already by Bryce, Brent, and even yourself. The questions that we're not able to answer today will be addressed via email. So
I'm happy to help you out, Diego, if you like.
Yep, that would be great, Kylie. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Kylie. I work with the City of Ryde with Diego as well, just to help put forward some of our questions. Some of you may or may not have seen them. The first one that we have is from an anonymous attendee who asks, how do you persuade more strata blocks to upgrade their systems and install EV charging stations?
Okay, I'll jump in and I'll take this one. Look, try and present it as moving the entire apartment block into a renewable energy future. And it's not just about preparing for the electric vehicles. It's like there are other benefits of renewable energy. Instead of paying $1.33 for each cent of hot water in your block, you might get that down to 13 cents for hot water. You'll reduce the cost of electricity inside apartments, and you're increasing the valuation of every apartment in the building. So Lend-Lease did a study, and if you put these new technologies into a building, it loads an extra 10K of value into each property, each individual apartment in the building. So property valuation uplift.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Brent. John from Blacktown has asked, do you know if I can find out what the EV road markings are for New South Wales? Who would we like to throw that one over to? Well,
I'm not exactly sure on what the question's asking. Well, electric vehicle is just like any vehicle. It's got a steering wheel and pedals, and you drive it along the road. There's no particular requirements when you're actually on the road. As for parking, what we've seen is councils start to put restricted parking conditions that are only allowing electric vehicles to charge. And as far as legislation point goes, local governments have passed requirements specifically for electric vehicle signage around that. But pretty much anyone can paint a road or a parking spot green. That's not necessarily a requirement, but it is a way to advertise where charging can go. But I do know that the sign markings for restricted parking only for electric vehicles is some legislation that has been passed. Gentlemen, any other points of view on that question?
I'd actually probably need to Evan. I'd be interested to know what the legislation is to get the exact markings that are supposed to be. There's quite a lot of variability in the markings and the ability to find the signs for where some of the charging gets put. There's a couple of times I've had difficulty. PlugShare tells me where it is and you can't find it.
Sure. I guess it really needs to catch up. That's really the summary is that there's a little bit of a lag in terms of the sign markings specific for electric vehicles.
Thank you for that. Just a bit of a statement here. Kai has posted in relation to electric buses and taxi power, saying that the disadvantage of electric buses and taxi is power shortages, problems caused after heavy rainfall. Therefore, we should keep a proportion of them as an internal combustion bus. Do we have any comment on that?
I could comment on that. The batteries, especially the ones in Shenzhou that were shown, they've got quite large batteries. They can run for hours without power, as in without recharging. So it's not really an issue. It's power outages would be at most for an hour or two, and generally much less. So much less than the time that it would take to run them flat.
Fantastic, thank you. And Hope is asking the panel, what is the average cost of using a public installed charger?
I might dive in. The ChargeFox network at the moment is charging 40 cents per kilowatt hour roughly. EV are charging a bit more for that, as Tasmania are charging more than that. But the sort of numbers. Ever do you have a?
Well, a lot of public charging is free. It's like if you go to McDonald's, you can get free Wi-Fi. You no longer have to pay for Wi-Fi. It's actually quite similar. If you go to Top Ride Shopping Centre, it's free. If you go to Macquarie Centre, it's free. If you go to Chatswood, Westfield, it's free to charge. And that's because they want you to stay maybe a little bit longer because you're getting free power, and then you buy a $10 coffee and cake or a $50 top. So a lot of public charging is free. Personally, when I'm going to my local Stocklands in Balgowlah, I could use free charging, but I actually like to park right near the front door because if I go home and charge, it costs me about $3. So, you know, it's a tough decision, but usually I leave it for someone who might not have access to home charging and relies on that public charger in order to be able to charge. So on a highway, it might cost you $10, $15, $20, something like that for a full tank, but public charging can be anywhere from free to that amount of money.
Yeah, I actually forgot that I was talking the DC fast charger type stuff. Evan's talking about mainly the AC stuff, etc. It's the slightly slower charging. Also, the NRMA main network is currently free to all users and will be remaining free to Automobile Association members after that. So it's a good excuse to join the Automobile Association for that continued free charging for the DC 50 kilowatt chargers.
We've got a couple of questions on the chat in relation to, will the webinar be available for replay? Yes, it will for the next couple of weeks. And Diego has just put a reminder saying that any of the questions that we can't get to today, we can address via email to those participants that have already registered. So thank you for that. Justin has asked, what does maintenance for an EV look like? Time between services, cost, skills required, etc.
I might jump in on this one because I've looked at it in a lot of detail. Nissan, for example, they have cap price servicing for their electric vehicles and for their non-electric vehicles or internal combustion engine vehicles. And if you just look at the cap price servicing, it's half. It's half as much for the Nissan Leaf compared to an equivalent passenger vehicle. My own experience has actually been zero. My electric vehicle basically needs no routine service. It's just if there's an issue that needs to be looked at, but there's no oil changes, there's no brake changes nearly as often because of the way the vehicle slows down by putting energy back into the battery. There's no air filter changes other than in the passenger cell once every 6 years. So servicing is a lot less, but if you wanted to do an inspection, Nissan charged $200 a year cap price servicing for their electric vehicle.
And I'll jump in with my experience with the Kona. That's $165 for 12 months or 15,000 Ks. And for that, you get a renewal of the annual roadside service, and you get an update of the maps. So just on those two alone, it's worth its $165 for someone to just check it, rotate the tyres, update the maps, update
That's
software.
pretty much all they do. They just inspect the vehicle. They don't actually change any consumables.
Yeah, and Tesla have no service schedule. It's just the car will tell someone when it needs to go in for something that needs doing. Otherwise, they have no service.
Excellent, thank you. We have a question here from Liz, who lives in, if I'm in an apartment, is it possible to get this technology in my block, even if everybody else isn't on board? And how do I get this started?
Yeah, so what we've done is we posted up into the chat a sample bylaw. So the very first thing that you need to do is approach your strata committee, say, here's a sample bylaw. Don't get greedy with the speed that you want to charge. If you buy a Tesla, you'll get a charge point with that car. And just say, I'm happy for single phase 16 amp charging, nothing that's going to put any strain on the building. And if you drive 25 kilometers a day to and from work, you'll get your charge at that speed in about 3 hours inside the apartment block. So download that sample bylaw and take it to your next AGM or strata committee meeting.
That's a very good question, and it's one that we as council get asked a lot as far as inhibitors to being able to enact sustainability, especially in relation to solar, relation to electric vehicles, and I think that's one thing that does stop people from actually trying because they don't think they can do it. But the technology is definitely there to enable both solar and EV. So
and
jump forward.
I should just jump in and say there's passage through the New South Wales government at the moment of the Sustainability Infrastructure Amendment to the Strata Schemes Act, probably coming in around September this year. And that will lower the bar from a special resolution where you need 75% at present to get these new technologies into the building down to 50%. So after September this year, new legislation making it easier to get that passed through strata committees.
Fantastic. Liz has also put in a couple of other questions too. Can we expect charging infrastructure to keep up with the uptake of electric vehicles? And how do we find out where EV charging stations are located?
Well, the short answer on EV charging locations is plugshare.com, and then basically toggle the type of charger you want to look for. And most of the new chargers are going up there first before anything else. And what was the other part of the question? It was where the chargers are and
will they keep up?
Can we expect?
Will they keep up? I think I typed an answer to there saying it really needs a federal policy to promote and support an EV transition. The states and the councils can only do so much. We need an overall general direction from the federal level, and that's just not happening. So they may or may not keep up. In Australia, we're so slow adopting them that at the moment they're comfortably keeping up.
What you have to remember is that 70% of charging happens at home. So that 70% of drivers will be able to charge at home. If you have somewhere to charge at home, even if you live in a unit block like me, I have charging at home. You pretty much don't need public fast charging at all, other than if you're maybe driving a long distance to Melbourne. And what we've seen from the New South Wales government, well, and certainly in New South Wales, that there is a good coverage of network on the major highways, and that's probably ahead of the curve. And is of priority. So I expect that on the major routes it'll be okay. If you're going to Broken Hill, it might be a little bit harder, and we might see a little bit of laggard until there's a national framework across those sort of distances.
And also another question from one of our councillors within the city was asking, when I look up the Fuel Watch app from the New South Wales government, it shows no charging stations in Ryde. How do we change this? Just following on from what Bryce was saying, even if you don't have the PlugShare app, you can actually get on Google Maps and you can type in the words electric vehicle and it will show you all the charging locations, what they are, how many there are, and if they're free or they're charged. That's another resource you can use as well. So over to the Fuel Watch app. I think, Bryce, you responded to this one.
Which one was that?
Looking up the Fuel Watch app from the New South Wales government, it isn't showing charging stations in Ryde, and how do we change this? And you put in there.
Oh, right, yeah, there's the answer bit. I didn't miss that tab, so I'm just trying to find my answer. What was the question? I can't quite remember.
There doesn't show any locations in Ryde under the Fuel Watch app, and how do we change this?
As I said, the plug share is the best way to find them. I don't know the Fuel Watch app.
Okay, yeah. And the same councillor has just asked, will the council policy change that comes to council later in the year also have targets to transition a percentage of fleet from combustible to EV? I can probably respond to that. We've been working in this space to assist council towards transitioning to lowered emissions vehicles for approximately 2 years. I'm sure the panelists here can assist me when I say, as far as fleet goes, it's a different story because there's a lot of fringe benefits tax that is associated with it. And although that we'd like to transition to 100% straight away, would be the short answer, there's a little bit more complexity around that, which does, fortunately, inhibit that rapid transition. So we are looking at that, and it is a priority for council to be able to lead the way in that space, and we've done that, the introduction of 2 of them in this year, and we'll be aiming to increase that. And we've just recently released our new fleet guide and list, and we've been able to increase that significantly, at least with hybrid and petrol EV and the inclusion of 1 EV as well. Hope that helps.
I now found the comment on the Fuel Watch app was where there are no chargers in Ryde, rather than getting Fuel Watch updated. If you haven't got any chargers in your local area, it's partly lobby the local council, and that's probably, I suggest, joining our Australian Electric Vehicle Association, AEVA, that I've mentioned earlier, because we have people you can talk to, and we have general letters that we can basically hand to you to get sent to your local council in support and with our sort of support with that. And you can also get local members to write in. So if you've got people with EVs, the more people saying to the council, we need charging, that will happen. But again, as Evan said, the majority of charging is done at home, but it is nice to have, say, at your community centres or your libraries, an AC charger just available for that occasional top up.
Okay, I think we're just about out of time, so I might hand over to Diego, and thank you all.
That's right. Yeah, we just went 7 minutes over time. It only shows that this is a really interesting and ever-evolving space. I guess it's safe to say that we're all learning as we quickly move into the EV space. One of the main takeaways from today might be that it's just a matter of time before EVs become mainstream. And as well, it's not that hard as well to actually access that technology, especially with prices going down, including charging solutions. But anyways, I'm not going to extend even anymore. We're ending the webinar now, and on behalf of Council, I would like to thank all the participants, including the speakers. We hope to touch base with you soon. I believe it's been a very informative session, and I hope you all enjoyed. This will certainly inspire us to run similar events in the near future. Have a good evening, everyone.
I'd say well done.
Thanks, Diego.
Thanks
so much.
There you go, Kate.